He paid for her virginity, but he didn't expect to fall in love. She entered this arrangement to survive, but she ended up discovering that the true price was her soul. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Emily glided through the corridors of the Plaza Hotel like a shadow accustomed to invisibility. At 26, her steps were calculated, silent, almost ghostly. The cleaning cart creaked softly as she pushed it, but the sound was lost in the muffled luxury of Persian carpets she would never walk on as a guest. It was almost 2 in the morning, and the night shift was her territory. There, between empty suites and deserted corridors, she could exist without being seen, without being judged, without having to explain why a woman her age had built nothing beyond survival. The navy blue uniform was always impeccable, not out of vanity but out of necessity. Emily had learned early that people like her had no right to sloppiness. She had been born on the margins of everything. Attention, protection, affection. On her skin, she carried silent scars from a childhood stolen by neglect, by the weight of caring for younger siblings when she didn't yet know how to care for herself. At 7, she already knew how to cook rice without burning it. At 12, she was negotiating with the owner of the grocery store in Queens to get credit. At 16, she was already working overnight to pay the bills her mother had abandoned along with the family. Now, a decade later, Emily continued paying debts that weren't hers. Her younger brother, Matthew, needed school uniforms. Her middle sister, Lucy, needed medications for her asthma. And the house where they grew up, an involuntary inheritance from a mother who ran off with a truck driver to upstate New York, needed a new roof before the next rains. Emily was the pillar of a family she never chose to support, but which she sustained with the silent obstinacy of someone who knows no other way to exist. At the hotel, she was just Emily from housekeeping. Nobody asked her last name, nobody was interested in her story. It was exactly how she preferred it. Invisible, safe, distant from the gazes that would transform her into something she didn't want to be. Emily had learned to recognize those looks, the ones that saw utility where they should see humanity. That's why she kept her head down, her hair always tied back, her body hidden under the loose uniform. That night, however, something was different. The manager had changed the schedule at the last minute, and Emily needed to clean the presidential suite, a territory that normally belonged to more experienced staff. The key trembled in her hand when she inserted it into the lock, not from fear of the work, but from a strange uneasiness, as if she knew something was about to change. The door opened to a world of marble and crystal. The suite was larger than the house where she lived with her siblings. The French silk curtains were open, revealing the panoramic view of Central Park, with its lights twinkling like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Emily took a deep breath, trying to concentrate on her work, but it was when she saw the illuminated balcony that her heart stopped. He was there, standing, leaning over the tempered glass railing with a glass of cognac between his long, elegant fingers. The dark suit was partially open, the tie undone, the white shirt wrinkled as if he had just defeated or destroyed someone. His brown hair was disheveled, and even from behind he radiated a presence that made the air in the suite seem denser. Emily wanted to retreat. She should retreat. But the door had already closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a sentence. The man turned slowly, as if he had known from the beginning that he wasn't alone. When his eyes met hers, Emily felt as if an invisible blade had cut her first and then stripped each layer of her soul. Alexander Blackwood. She recognized him immediately from the magazine covers she sometimes leafed through at the newsstand on her way to work. 38 years old, pharmaceutical industry magnate, owner of a fortune that seemed to have sprouted from nowhere in less than a decade. The tabloids portrayed him as an emotional predator, a ruthless businessman, and cruel to the women who dared to get close. But there, in the golden light of the suite, he seemed different. There was something in his dark eyes that wasn't just power or arrogance. There was something that dangerously resembled pain. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice deep and slightly hoarse, as if he had been shouting or drinking too much. He didn't seem surprised by her presence, just interested. Emily felt her hands tremble as she held the cleaning cart. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know there was someone in the suite." "I'll come back later," she murmured, trying to sound professional despite her racing heart. But Alexander didn't move to let her go. Instead, he took a few steps in her direction, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel naked, despite the uniform that covered every inch of her skin. He observed her as if trying to decipher a puzzle, as if she were a piece that didn't fit in the jigsaw of his reality. "What's your name?" The question came out low, almost a whisper. Emily hesitated. Answering meant existing for him, and she intuitively knew that existing for Alexander Blackwood would be dangerous. "Emily," she finally said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Emily." He repeated the name as if tasting a rare wine. "How old are you, Emily?" 26. Why was she answering? Why couldn't she just leave? Alexander smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. There was something dark, almost predatory, and yet Emily couldn't look away. It was as if he had hypnotized her with those eyes that seemed to hold secrets she couldn't even imagine existed. "You're a virgin." It wasn't a question. Alexander stated it, as if he could read Emily's most intimate secrets just by looking at her. The blush that rose to her face was answer enough. He took a few more steps, reducing the distance between them, and Emily could smell the masculine perfume, amber, leather, and something indefinable that made her think of danger. "I need to work," she stammered, trying to push the cart toward the door. But Alexander moved with feline agility, blocking her exit without even touching her. $50,000, he said, his voice low and controlled. "I'll pay $50,000 for your virginity. Tell me if it's not enough, we can negotiate." Emily's world stopped. For a moment, she could only hear her own heart hammering in her chest like an uneven drum. $50,000 was more money than she could gather in 5 years of work. It was enough to renovate the house, pay all the debts, ensure that Matthew could study in a decent school. It was the freedom she had never dared to dream of, and it was also the most humiliating thing anyone had ever proposed to her. "You're insane," she whispered, her voice trembling with anger and shock. "I'm not a prostitute." Alexander tilted his head, studying her with that disturbing intensity. "I didn't say you were. I just said I'm interested in something you possess and willing to pay well for it. It's a commercial transaction like any other." "It's not the same thing," Emily exploded, humiliation giving way to fury. "You can't just buy people." "I can buy almost anything, Emily, and I usually get what I want." There was a coldness in his voice that made her tremble, but also a kind of weariness, as if this conversation was just one more in a long sequence of similar negotiations. "You have something I want. I have something you need. I don't see where the moral problem is." Emily backed up until she hit the cold marble wall. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about what I need or want." Alexander smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "I know you support 2 siblings by yourself. I know your house in Queens has foundation problems, and the roof will collapse in the next heavy rain. I know your younger brother was suspended from school for not being able to pay the overdue tuition. I know you work 3 different shifts to pay bills that aren't yours." He paused, observing the impact of his words on her face. "Shall I continue?" Emily felt her legs weaken. "How did he know all this?" You had me investigated. I do that with anyone who sparks my interest. It's a survival habit." Alexander finished the cognac in one gulp and placed the empty glass on the crystal center table. "The offer still stands. Think about it carefully." "No." The word came out firmer than Emily felt. "I don't need to think." The answer is no. For the first time since he had turned around, Alexander seemed genuinely surprised. His eyebrows rose slightly, and something that could be respect passed quickly through his eyes before disappearing. "Interesting," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "It's been a while since someone said no to me." Emily took advantage of the momentary distraction to push the cart toward the door, but Alexander called her before she could leave. "Emily." His voice had changed, becoming less predatory and more curious. "May I ask you why?" She stopped with her hand on the doorknob without turning around. "Because some things aren't for sale, Mr. Blackwood, no matter how much money you have." Alexander was silent for so long that Emily began to wonder if he had heard. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded strange, almost vulnerable. "Everyone has a price." "Emily, everyone?" "Then you don't know the right people," she replied, opening the door. "Wait." Alexander approached again, and this time Emily could see that there was something different in his eyes, a kind of fascination that made her feel like a rare animal in a zoo. "If you change your mind, I won't change it. If you do," he continued as if she hadn't spoken, "leave a message at the reception desk. Just say you accept the dinner invitation." Emily left without responding, her heart still racing, her hands trembling so much she could barely push the cart down the corridor. Only when she reached the basement locker room of the hotel did she allow herself to cry. Not from sadness, but from a deep, visceral anger, directed at both him and herself, because for a moment, just a moment, she had considered the offer. 2 weeks later, Emily discovered that the rent for the house had been paid by an anonymous donor. The housing complex administrator couldn't explain how or why, only said that a lawyer had appeared with the money and the necessary receipts. On the same day, Matthew came home from school with the news that he had been readmitted. The overdue tuition had been paid, and someone had even paid in advance for the entire school year. Emily knew exactly who was behind it all, and the certainty left her furious and confused at the same time. Alexander was playing a game she didn't understand, using a generosity that sounded more like manipulation. It was as if he was proving that he could take care of her life better than she could herself, that her independence was just an illusion. The following night, when she arrived at the hotel for her shift, the boss called her into the office. "Emily, from today you're going to work only in the executive wing. It's a promotion." The woman avoided her gaze, clearly uncomfortable. "A slightly better salary, more flexible hours. But why? I didn't ask for a promotion. Orders from above. Someone up there noticed your good work." Emily knew it was a lie. She knew that Alexander was pulling the strings of her life as if she were a puppet, and the feeling of powerlessness consumed her. At the same time, she couldn't deny that the changes were making her life easier. For the first time in years, she could sleep more than 4 hours a night. For the first time since adolescence, she didn't have to worry about the month's bills, and that scared her more than any indecent proposal. For 3 weeks, Emily didn't see Alexander at the hotel. She began to believe that perhaps he had given up, that her refusal had been enough to drive him away for good. But each shift she felt as if she was being observed. She couldn't prove it, but there was a tension in the air that made her look over her shoulder constantly. The security guards seemed more attentive when she passed by. The security cameras seemed to follow her through the corridors. The new routine in the executive wing was strange. Fewer rooms to clean, more time between tasks, and a constant feeling that she was being tested. The suites were all impeccable, occupied by important business people, who rarely left traces of their presence beyond empty glasses and folded newspapers. Emily began to suspect that some of the rooms weren't even occupied. They were just an excuse to keep her away from the other employees, isolated in a territory that Alexander could control. At home, the changes continued happening. Matthew arrived one day with new books, saying that the school had implemented a donation program for underprivileged students. Lucy received a state-of-the-art inhaler from a health clinic that was supposedly testing experimental treatments. Even the owner of the grocery store where Emily had been buying on credit for years appeared, saying that a benefactor had paid off all the family's pending debts. It was as if an invisible hand was weaving a safety net around Emily's life, and she knew exactly whose hand it was. Alexander's generosity wasn't charity, it was strategy. He was proving that he could take care of her better than she took care of herself, that he could solve all her problems with the ease of someone signing a check. And the most disturbing thing was that it worked. For the first time in her adult life, Emily could breathe. She could think about something beyond overdue bills and medical emergencies. She could even dream, a luxury she had abandoned long ago. And she hated Alexander for it, because she knew that each relieved breath left her more indebted to him. It was on a rainy Thursday that he appeared again. Emily was cleaning suite 1507 when she heard the door open behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The air in the room immediately changed, becoming denser, charged with an electric tension that made her skin tingle. "Hello, Emily?" The deep voice sounded exactly as she remembered, but there was something different in it, a kind of tiredness that didn't exist in their first encounter. She turned slowly, holding a cleaning cloth as if it were a shield. Alexander was leaning against the closed door, wearing a charcoal grey suit that highlighted his dark eyes. He seemed thinner than she remembered, with deeper shadows around his eyes as if he wasn't sleeping well. "Mr. Blackwood," she responded, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I didn't know you were staying in this suite." "I'm not. I just came to talk to you." He moved away from the door but didn't approach her. He maintained a respectful distance that somehow was more unsettling than his previous proximity. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For showing me that there are still people of integrity in the world." It was refreshing to be rejected. Alexander smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "It hasn't happened for a long time." Emily frowned. "If you're trying to make me feel special, it's not working. And if you're trying to soften me up to repeat your proposal, I'm not going to repeat the proposal, Emily." He interrupted gently. "At least not in the same form." "I won't accept in any form." Emily crossed her arms over her chest, in a defensive posture that didn't go unnoticed by Alexander. "I know." He walked to the window, watching the rain that ran down the glass like tears. "You're different from the others." "What others?" Alexander was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Women I've known." "That I hurt." His voice grew lower. "You remind me of someone." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in the way he said this, a vulnerability that contrasted drastically with the controlled predator she had met 3 weeks before. "Who?" she asked, although part of her didn't want to know the answer. "My sister." The words came out as if they were forcibly torn from him. Alexander didn't take his eyes off the window, but Emily could see the tension in his shoulders, in the rigid line of his jaw. "She died when I was 17. Emily hadn't expected this revelation. Of all the things she had imagined, a family tragedy wasn't among them. "How?" "That doesn't matter." Alexander turned abruptly, and for a moment Emily saw something in his eyes that frightened her, a pain so deep it seemed capable of swallowing a person whole. "What matters is that you look very much like her. Physically, I mean. And that confuses me." "Confuses you how?" Alexander hesitated, as if navigating dangerous territory. "Sometimes when I look at you, I see her, and I need to remember that you're a different person, who has choices that she never had." Emily didn't know what to say. The revelation had changed something fundamental in the dynamic between them, transforming Alexander from a predator into something more complex, more human. And somehow that made him even more dangerous. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. "Because I want you to understand that I'm not just a rich man trying to buy your body." Alexander approached her then, but stopped at a safe distance. "I'm a man trying to understand why you awaken things in me that I thought I had buried with her." Emily swallowed hard. "And what do you intend to do about it?" "Nothing," he said, but his voice didn't sound convincing even to himself. "Absolutely nothing. I'm going to respect your decision and leave you in peace." But even as he said this, Emily could see in his eyes that it was a lie. Alexander wouldn't leave her in peace because he couldn't. There was something between them now, an invisible connection woven of pain, memory, and a desire that neither of them wanted to admit. "Can I go now?" asked Emily, although she already knew the answer. "You can," Alexander responded, moving away from the door. "But Emily?" She stopped at the door without turning around. "If you change your mind about anything, you know how to find me." Emily left without responding, but for the first time since she'd met him, she wasn't running from him. She was running from herself, from the way her heart had raced when he mentioned his dead sister, from the unwanted compassion she had felt when she saw the pain in his eyes. Alexander wasn't just a predator, he was a broken man. And Emily was beginning to realize that broken men could be much more dangerous than predators. 2 weeks passed in a tense silence. Emily didn't see Alexander, but she felt his presence in an almost supernatural way. It was as if he had left an invisible mark on her life, a disturbance in the balance she had carefully built over the years. The nights were the worst. Lying on the thin mattress in the room she shared with Lucy, Emily found herself thinking about his words about his dead sister, about the pain she had seen in his eyes, about the way his voice had trembled when mentioning the past, and she hated herself for it. It was Matthew who brought the first clue about the connections that Emily couldn't see. The 15-year-old boy arrived home one Saturday afternoon with a confused expression, holding a yellowed folder of documents that seemed to have come from a dusty archive. "Emily, did you know that Mom worked for a rich family before we were born?" he asked, throwing the folder on the kitchen table. Emily looked up from the notebook where she was doing the month's accounts. "What do you mean? What folder is that?" "I found it in the attic of neighbor Mrs. Wilson's house," she said. "Mom asked her to keep it when she ran off with the truck driver." "There's a bunch of old papers." Matthew opened the folder, revealing yellow documents, some faded photographs, and what appeared to be a contract. Emily approached, her heart starting to beat faster, for reasons she couldn't explain. The photographs showed a young woman, her mother Rose, dressed as a domestic employee next to an imposing mansion. In the second photo, Rose was holding a baby in her arms, smiling in a way that Emily had never seen before. There was happiness in that smile, a lightness that contrasted drastically with the bitter and absent woman Emily remembered. "Who is that baby?" murmured Lucy, who had approached curiously. Emily picked up the document that was underneath the photos. It was an employment contract, dated 27 years ago, signed by Rose Parker Smith. The employer was listed as Blackwood Family. The name made Emily feel as if she had been punched in the stomach. "My God," she whispered, her hands trembling as she read the clauses of the contract. It was a standard domestic employment agreement, but there was an additional section, handwritten in elegant calligraphy. Emily had to read it 3 times before she could process what she was seeing. "Special clause," she read aloud, her voice trembling. "The employee agrees to preserve and deliver whatever is necessary, when requested, for the well-being and continuity of the employing family. This responsibility extends to her descendants, if applicable." "What does that mean?" asked Matthew, but Emily didn't answer. She was focused on the small symbol at the bottom of the document, an ornate coat of arms that she was sure she had seen before, but couldn't remember where. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake looking at the cracked ceiling, trying to understand the implications of what she had discovered. Her mother had worked for the Blackwood family. Alexander had said that she resembled his sister, and now there was a strange contract that talked about delivering what is necessary and responsibilities that extended to descendants. It was impossible that it was a coincidence. Everything in Emily's life was beginning to seem orchestrated, as if she were a piece in a game that had begun even before her birth. The feeling that she was being manipulated intensified until it became almost unbearable. On Monday, Emily arrived at the hotel determined to confront Alexander. She spent the entire shift looking for him, checking the guest registry, discreetly asking the security guards, but he wasn't there. It was as if he had completely disappeared, leaving only the persistent feeling of being watched. It was on Wednesday that she found him. Or rather, that he found her. Emily was leaving the hotel at the end of her shift when she saw the black limousine parked on the sidewalk. The rear window rolled down slowly, revealing Alexander's familiar face. He didn't say anything, just nodded his head toward the empty seat beside him. Emily hesitated. Every instinct screamed for her to simply keep walking, take the bus as she always did, go home and pretend that none of this was happening. But curiosity was stronger than fear, and perhaps deep down she wanted answers as much as he wanted her. She got into the car. The interior of the limousine was luxurious in a way that Emily had never experienced. Soft leather, subtle lights, a complete minibar, and Alexander's unmistakable perfume permeating the air. He was sitting relaxedly in the opposite corner, wearing a dark suit without a tie, the first buttons of his shirt open, revealing tanned skin and what appeared to be the beginning of a scar. "Thank you for accepting my invitation," he said, his voice calm but with an underlying tension that Emily could feel. It wasn't an invitation. It was an ambush. Emily crossed her arms, trying to appear more confident than she felt. "I need to talk to you." "I imagine so." Alexander leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Found something interesting at home recently." The question hit Emily like a slap. "How did you... You knew about the documents? Juist thought I knew that eventually you would find them, or that they would find you." Alexander sighed, running his hand through his hair in a demonstration of weariness that seemed genuine. "Your mother worked for my family for 5 years. She took care of me and my sister when we were children. And what does that clause in the contract mean? About delivering what is necessary?" Emily tried to keep her voice firm, but she could hear the tremor in it. Alexander was silent for a long moment, looking through the dark window. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded distant, as if remembering something very painful. My family has a long tradition of special agreements with trusted people, mutual protection, favors, obligations that extend beyond traditional employment. He looked back at Emily, and there was something dark in his eyes. Your mother agreed to these terms in exchange for a substantial amount of money, and the promise that her family would always be protected. Protected from what? From people like me. The answer came out as a whisper, but the impact was devastating. Emily felt as if the ground had moved beneath her feet. What do you mean by that? Alexander leaned even further forward, until Emily could feel his warm breath on her face. His eyes were two dark pools of something she couldn't identify. Desire, pain, guilt, all mixed into an expression that made her want to both run and stay. I mean, Emily, that you were not a coincidence in my life. I mean that perhaps, from the beginning, we were destined to meet. And I mean that this scares me more than any deal I've ever closed. The limousine glided through the streets of New York City, as Emily tried to process what she had just heard. Destined to meet. The words echoed in her mind like a disturbing mantra, mixing with the soft purr of the engine and the muffled sound of traffic outside. She could feel Alexander watching her, studying each micro-expression on her face, as if he were a scientist analyzing a chemical reaction. "You're lying," she finally said, although her voice didn't sound convincing even to herself. "This is all very convenient, very foreplanned." Alexander leaned back in the leather seat, a bitter smile playing on his lips. "You have no idea how much." "Then explain it to me. Tell me the whole truth." Emily turned to face him completely, the decision becoming crystalline in her mind. "Or I'll get out of this car right now and you'll never see me again." "And what if I say I prefer that you leave, that it would be better for both of us if you simply disappeared from my life?" The question came loaded with a vulnerability that Alexander tried to disguise but that Emily caught immediately. "Then why don't you leave me in peace? Why do you keep paying our bills, manipulating my life, appearing when I least expect it?" Emily leaned forward, invading his personal space in the same way he had invaded hers. "Why, Alexander?" His name coming from her lips seemed to have a physical effect on Alexander. His eyes closed for a moment as if he were in pain, and when he opened them again there was something different in them, something dangerously close to honesty. "Because," he began, his voice hoarse, "since you walked into that suite I can't stop thinking about you. Because every time I close my eyes I see your face. Because you make me remember a time when I was still human." The words hit Emily like a blow to the chest. There was so much pain in them, so much poorly disguised loneliness, that she had to fight against the impulse to console him. But Emily had learned very young to be wary of men who used vulnerability as a weapon. "And your sister, Amelia, did she really exist, or was she just one more of your lies?" Alexander opened his eyes abruptly, and Emily saw that she had struck a nerve. "How do you know her name?" Emily hesitated. She hadn't mentioned the name before. She had seen it on the sheet music she found in the locked room of the mansion, but that would mean admitting she had been there. "I heard it somewhere." "No." Alexander leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her with a laser intensity. "Where did you hear that name, Emily?" The tension in the car became almost palpable. Emily could feel the danger radiating from Alexander, like heat from a furnace. But there was something more, a kind of desperation that made her realize she had stumbled onto something much bigger than she imagined. "Answer me," he insisted, and for the first time Emily heard a note of panic in his voice. "I saw it on sheet music. In your house." The words came out before Emily could stop them, and she saw the immediate impact on Alexander's face. "You entered the locked room." It wasn't a question. Alexander leaned back again, passing his hands over his face in a gesture of profound exhaustion. "My God, Emily, you have no idea what you've just done. What did I do?" "I entered a room." "And when was I in your house?" Emily was confused now, the memories mixing in a way that didn't make sense. Alexander observed her for a long moment, as if making a crucial decision. When he finally spoke, his voice was loaded with a sadness that made Emily's heart tighten. "You were in my house 3 times when you were little. Your mother brought you when she had no one to leave you with. You played with Amelia while Rose worked." He paused, swallowing with difficulty. "You two were inseparable. Amelia used to say that you were the sister she never had. Emily felt the world spin around her. Fragmented memories began to emerge from the depths of her mind. A huge house, a blonde girl with blue eyes, a piano, a porcelain doll. Memories that she had categorized as dreams or childhood fantasies began to take on the contours of reality. I remember, she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. There was a garden. And she taught me to play the piano. Chopin's Waltz, Opus 64, number 2. Alexander completed, and Emily felt tears burn her eyes. It was the two of you sitting on the piano bench, Amelia guiding your small hands over the keys. What happened to her? The question came out loaded with a pain that Emily didn't know she carried. Alexander was silent for so long that Emily began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded like broken glass. She died because of me. Because I couldn't protect her. Because I was a coward. He looked directly at Emily, and she could see unshed tears shining in his eyes. And since then, I've tried to find a way to bring her back. Until you appeared and made me realize that maybe I didn't want to anymore. Emily felt as if she were diving into waters too deep, being pulled down by currents she couldn't understand. The connection between her and Alexander wasn't just attraction or coincidence. It was a complex web of past, trauma, and a guilt that seemed to suffocate him. I'm not her, said Emily, her voice firm despite the tears. I can't be her for you. I know. Alexander extended his hand, gently touching her face, and Emily couldn't move away. But maybe you can be yourself. And maybe that's enough. His touch sent waves of heat through Emily's body, awakening sensations she had never experienced. It was as if every cell of her skin had come alive, pulsing with a need she didn't know how to name. Alexander moved closer slowly, giving her time to move away. But Emily remained motionless, caught between fear and a desire that grew like fire in her veins. When his lips touched hers, it was as if the world exploded in colors that Emily had never seen. The kiss was soft at first, almost reverent, but when she responded, and she did respond, God forgive her, she did respond. Alexander deepened the contact, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer. Emily had never been kissed before. She had never imagined it would be like this, devastating, consuming, as if she were being devoured and created at the same time. She could taste him, amber and danger, could feel the restrained strength in the muscles of his arms, could hear the low moan that escaped his throat when she deepened the kiss. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Alexander rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if trying to memorize her. You don't know what you're doing to me, he murmured against her lips. Emily didn't answer. She couldn't answer. Because for the first time in her life, she was beginning to understand what desire was. And the discovery terrified her as much as it excited her. Emily spent the next 3 days in a state of constant disturbance. The kiss had awakened something primitive inside her, a hunger she didn't know how to name, and that grew with each passing hour. She found herself touching her lips during work, remembering the sensation of Alexander's mouth on hers, the taste of him that seemed to have impregnated her soul. At night, lying in the darkness of her room, her body pulsed with needs she had never experienced. It was a silent torture that left her irritable and confused. Lucy commented that she was different, more distracted. Matthew asked if she was sick. But how could Emily explain that she was discovering desire at 26, and that the discovery was happening through the most dangerous man she had ever met? On Saturday night, when she arrived home after a particularly long shift, she found an elegant envelope under the door. Inside, a simple card with the handwritten calligraphy she was already learning to recognize. Dinner tomorrow. PM. Choose your answer. I will respect any decision. A. Emily stayed awake all night looking at the card. She knew she should tear it up, throw it away, pretend she had never received it. She knew that responding in any way would be crossing a line that would change her life forever. But when Sunday came, she found herself choosing the only decent dress she owned, a simple black one that she had bought for a neighbor's funeral years ago. The restaurant was discreet, elegantly quiet in a way that screamed old money. Emily felt out of place among the mahogany tables and livery-clad waiters. But Alexander was there waiting for her, and the relief on his face when she appeared was so genuine that all her reservations almost melted away. I thought you wouldn't come, he said, rising to pull out her chair. "I thought so too," admitted Emily, accepting the chivalrous gesture that contrasted drastically with the crude proposal he had made weeks ago. During dinner, Alexander was different, more human. He told her about his childhood, about how Amelia was the only light in a house dominated by a cruel father and an absent mother. He talked about how he had built his pharmaceutical empire from nothing, about the sleepless nights and the difficult decisions he had made. He didn't mention the original proposal, didn't pressure, didn't seduce. He just talked to her as if she were a real person, not an object of desire. And it was precisely because of this that Emily found herself being seduced. "Why me?" she asked when they were at dessert. A tiramisu she had barely touched. "Of all the women you could have, why me?" Alexander was silent for a moment, twirling the wine glass between his fingers. "Because you said no to me. Because when I look at you, I don't see greed or interest. I see strength." He raised his eyes to meet hers. "And because when you entered my life, it was the first time in years that I felt that perhaps I could be forgiven." Forgiven for what? For everything. The answer was simple but loaded with a weight that Emily could feel. For not having been able to save Amelia. For becoming the kind of man she would have despised. For having spent the last 15 years trying to buy absolution, when I should have sought redemption. Emily felt her resistance melting like sugar in the rain. There was something in Alexander's vulnerability that disarmed all her defenses, that made her forget he was dangerous. Or perhaps it was precisely because he was dangerous that she felt attracted. She had spent her entire life being the strong person, the one who took care of everyone. With Alexander, she could feel that there was someone even stronger, someone who could take care of her. It was a dangerous thought, and she knew it. When they left the restaurant, Alexander didn't try to kiss her again. He just held her hand as they walked to the limousine, the simple touch sending waves of heat through her arm. In the car, he maintained a respectful distance, but Emily could feel the tension radiating from him, the restraint that was costing a visible effort. "Emily," he said when they were getting close to her house, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She turned to face him, her heart accelerating. "What? Do you feel anything for me?" "Anything at all?" The question came out vulnerable, almost desperate. "Because if you don't, I'll stop. I'll leave you in peace. I'll stop interfering in your life. But if you do, if there's any possibility..." Emily interrupted him by placing her hand on his face, feeling the stubble scratch her palm. "I do," she whispered, the admission costing her everything. "God forgive me, but I do." Alexander closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, like a hungry man leans over a piece of bread. "Then come with me tonight. Not for money, not out of obligation. Come because you want to." Emily knew that if she said yes, there would be no going back. She knew she was about to cross a line that would change her forever, that would take her to a world from which she might never be able to escape. But when she looked at Alexander, she saw not just the powerful magnate or the dangerous predator. She saw the boy who had lost his sister, the man who carried guilt he couldn't forgive, the tormented soul that recognized hers. "Yes," she said, the word coming out like an exhalation. Alexander's mansion in the Hamptons was even more imposing than Emily had imagined, all in marble and glass, with illuminated gardens that extended as far as the eye could see. But it was when they entered that Emily truly understood the loneliness that Alexander inhabited. The house was beautiful, perfect and completely devoid of life. There were no personal photographs, no objects that indicated that someone actually lived there. It was like an elegant mausoleum. "Is this where you live?" she asked, her voice echoing in the high corridors. "It's where I sleep," Alexander corrected. "Living implies life, and I stopped doing that a long time ago." He took her to the upper floor, to a master suite that was larger than the entire house where Emily lived. The bed was enormous, covered with white silk sheets that seemed never to have been touched. There was a lit fireplace, candles scattered throughout the room, as if Alexander had prepared everything carefully. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," he said, stopping at a safe distance from her. "We can just talk, or I can take you home." Emily observed him, this powerful man who could have any woman waiting for her permission like a nervous teenager. The discovery that he was afraid too touched her in a way she hadn't expected. "Alexander," she said, her voice firmer than she felt, "teach me." His eyes darkened. Teach you what? Everything. Emily approached him, placing her hands on his masculine chest, feeling the racing heart under her palm. Teach me what it is to want someone. Teach me what it is to be touched. Teach me. She hesitated, her cheeks blushing. Teach me how to give you pleasure. Alexander moaned, softly, as if her words were physical torture. Emily, you don't know what you're asking. Then show me. It was he who yielded first. His hands rose to hold her face, his thumbs caressing her cheeks with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity of his gaze. When he kissed her this time, it was with a controlled hunger that made Emily tremble from head to toe. Alexander touched her as if she were made of crystal, each caress measured, each kiss a silent question that Emily answered with low moans she didn't know she was capable of emitting. Her hands trembled when he took off her dress, sliding the silk down her shoulders with a reverence that made her feel like a goddess. For the first time in her life, Emily saw herself through the eyes of a man who desired her, not for utility, not for convenience, but for herself. You're beautiful, murmured Alexander against her skin, his voice hoarse with contained desire. More beautiful than any fantasy I could create. Emily blushed to the roots of her hair, trying to cover herself, but Alexander gently held her hands. No, he said, let me look at you. Let me adore you as you deserve. And that's exactly what he did. For hours that felt like an eternity suspended in time, Alexander explored every inch of Emily's body, with a patience that bordered on torture. His large, warm hands mapped every curve, every line, every place that made Emily arch her back and sigh his name. He taught her that her body was capable of sensations she had never imagined. That pleasure was a language she could speak fluently when she had the right teacher. When Alexander finally possessed her, it was with a gentleness that completely contradicted his reputation as a predator. He held her as she got used to the invasion, kissing the tears that ran down her face, not from pain but from an emotion so intense she couldn't contain it. It was as if something inside her was awakening after years of forced hibernation. Breathe, he whispered in her ear, his own breathing uneven. Relax for me, love. Let me take care of you. The word love came out so naturally that Emily doubted he had noticed. But she noticed, and something inside her chest expanded like a flower opening for the first time. When the initial pain passed and pleasure began to build in increasingly intense waves, Emily understood why people wrote poetry about this, why wars were fought, why lives were destroyed. It wasn't just sex. It was a connection so deep that it seemed to rewrite her DNA. Alexander moaned her name like a prayer, as if it were the only word that mattered in the universe. And when Emily finally came undone in his arms, screaming his name in a voice she didn't recognize as her own, she felt as if she had died and been reborn in a completely new version of herself. Afterward, lying in the tangle of silk sheets, Alexander pulled her into his arms as if he were afraid she might disappear. Emily could feel his heart still racing against her ear, could feel his hands trembling as they caressed her hair. There was something vulnerable in the way he held her, as if she were the most precious thing he had ever possessed. Emily, he said finally, his voice low in the darkness, illuminated only by candles. I need to tell you something. About Amelia. About how she died. Emily propped herself on her elbow to look at him. In the soft light, Alexander seemed younger but also more broken. There was a pain in his eyes that she recognized. It was the same she saw in the mirror when she thought about the mother who had abandoned. Harrison, you don't have to... I do, Alexander interrupted her gently. Because if we're going to do this, if we're going to try to have something real, you need to know who I really am. Emily waited, feeling the tension grow in his body, seeing him struggle with words that clearly cost everything for him to say. Amelia wasn't just my sister. She was special, innocent in a way that doesn't exist anymore in the world. My father... Alexander closed his eyes as if the memory was physically painful. My father wasn't a good man. He used people, broke them for pleasure. And when Amelia turned 16, he decided it was time for her to pay for all the favors he had done for other families. Emily felt a wave of nausea. Alexander. He sold her, Emily. My own father sold my sister to a man who collected young virgins like trophies. The words came out like shards of glass. I tried to stop him. God, how I tried. But I was young, stupid, cowardly. I thought I could negotiate, thought I could find another way. Emily saw tears sliding from the corners of Alexander's closed eyes, and her heart broke for him. On the night she was to be delivered, Amelia ran away. She took the car and drove to the edge of the cliff on the road to the Hamptons. They said it was an accident, that she lost control. But I knew the truth. She preferred to die than be touched by that monster. Oh, Alexander, Emily touched his face, her own tears falling now. And I became everything she would hate. I built an empire using the same methods my father used. I broke people, bought people, convinced myself it was necessary to have enough power, so that never again could anyone take from me what I loved. Alexander opened his eyes, and Emily could see all the pain of 15 years concentrated there. Until you appeared and made me realize I had become exactly the kind of man who killed my sister. Emily said nothing for a long moment, just held his face between her hands, letting him see the compassion in her eyes. Finally, she kissed him softly, a kiss that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with forgiveness. "You're not your father," she whispered against his lips. "And I'm not Amelia. I'm Emily, and I'm here because I chose to be, because I saw beyond the man you think you are, and found the man you can be." Alexander pulled her closer, burying his face in her neck. "So you scare me," he admitted, "because for the first time in 15 years, I have something I don't want to lose, and I don't know how to protect you from myself." "Then don't protect me," Emily said, her voice firm despite the tears. "Let me stay. Let me help you carry this." That night, Emily discovered more than just physical pleasure. She discovered that love could be born from shared pain, that real intimacy happened when two broken people decided to trust each other with their sharpest pieces. When she finally fell asleep in Alexander's arms, she felt complete for the first time in her life. But at dawn, she woke up alone. There was a note on the pillow beside hers. "Had to travel for a few days. Urgent business. Please stay in the house for as long as you want. My entire world is at your disposal. I'll be back soon. A." Emily got dressed quickly, her heart tight with a feeling of abandonment she knew too well. But when she was leaving, she passed by the door of the locked room that Alexander had mentioned, Amelia's sanctuary. This time the door was open. Inside she found exactly what he had described: portraits of a young blonde woman with blue eyes, letters never sent, a piano covered by a black sheet. But there was something more, an open folder on the table, full of documents that made Emily's blood freeze in her veins. Contracts. Dozens of them, all signed by young women, all similar to her and Amelia, and all containing the same clause she had seen in her mother's contract. Emily realized with devastating clarity that perhaps she wasn't as special as she had thought. Perhaps she was just one more in a long line of Alexander's attempts to resurrect his dead sister. Emily spent 3 days in the mansion, like a ghost wandering through corridors that echoed her own betrayal. Each document she found in Amelia's room was like a knife to the chest. Contracts dated from the last 5 years, all with the same structure, all with young women between 20 and 25 years old. Marina Johnson, dark-haired with dark eyes. Camilla Foster, brown hair and average height. Juliana Stevens, born in Queens, just like Emily and dozens of others, all physically similar, all from humble origins, all with families in financial difficulties that were mysteriously resolved before the contracts were signed. The pattern was so obvious that Emily felt like an idiot for not having noticed before. Alexander had orchestrated their meeting, had manipulated her life, had created the perfect conditions for her to feel grateful, dependent, in love. She was just another doll in his macabre collection of substitutes for Amelia. The anger growing inside Emily was different from anything she had felt before. It wasn't the powerless anger of poverty or social injustice. It was the cold, calculated anger of someone who had been deceived in the cruelest possible way. Alexander had used her virginity, her innocence, her feelings as instruments in a symphony of manipulation that she hadn't even realized was playing. On the 4th day, Emily was packing her things, the few clothes she had brought, when she heard the front door open. The sound of Alexander's footsteps echoing on the marble made her heart race, but this time it wasn't anticipation. It was war. "Emily." His voice sounded relieved, almost euphoric. "Love, where are you?" She descended the stairs slowly, each step measured, her face a mask of serenity that hid the internal hurricane. Alexander was in the main hall, still wearing his travel suit, his hair disheveled, his eyes shining with a happiness that was immediately replaced by confusion when he saw her expression. "What happened?" he asked, approaching, but Emily backed away. "How many?" The question came out low, but charged with a coldness that made Alexander stop mid-step. "How many what?" Emily laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Don't insult me by pretending you don't know what I'm talking about. How many women like me have you had, Alexander? How many poor orphans did you generously save before taking them to your bed?" Alexander's face instantly paled. "Emily, Marina, Camilla, Juliana." Emily began to enumerate, observing the impact of each name on his face. "Should I continue? Because I found at least 15 contracts in your little sanctuary up there. You entered Amelia's room. You let me enter Amelia's room." Emily exploded, all containment disappearing at once. "You opened the door, you left the documents in plain sight. Did you think I was too stupid to connect the dots?" Alexander ran his hand through his hair, the gesture revealing a vulnerability that Emily was no longer sure was genuine or staged. "It's not what you're thinking." "Oh, it's not. Then explain it to me. Tell me how 15 women who look like me, all from poor families, all the same ages, all with the same financial problems that were mysteriously solved, isn't a pattern. Explain to me how this isn't you trying to recreate your dead sister, using desperate women." "Because you're different," Alexander shouted, his composure finally breaking. "Because none of them made me feel what you make me feel. Because none of them said no when I offered money. Because none of them made me want to be a better man." Emily felt tears burn her eyes, but fought to keep them under control. "And what happened to them, Alexander? To Marina, Camilla, all the others? Where are they now?" The silence that followed was more revealing than any confession could have been. Alexander looked away, and Emily saw the truth written in every line of his face. "You got tired of them," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "When you realized they weren't Amelia, you simply discarded them." "I helped them," said Alexander, but his voice sounded hollow even to him. "They're all fine. They all have their own homes, education, opportunities. They all have scars," Emily corrected, "because you played with their hearts the same way you're playing with mine." Alexander approached her then, his eyes desperate. "Emily, please. I know how it looks, but you have to understand, I was lost. Since Amelia died, I was just existing, trying to find a way to feel human again. Yes, I looked for women who resembled her, but never—" "Never what?" Emily interrupted. "Never truly fell in love. Never felt something real." She laughed bitterly. "Or is that what you told all of them?" "No." Alexander grabbed her arms, and for the first time Emily saw real fear in his eyes. "Emily, I love you. For the first time in my life, I truly love someone. You have to believe me." "How can I believe?" The tears finally began to fall. "How can I trust anything you say when our entire relationship was built on lies?" It was then that someone knocked on the door. The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot, making both of them turn. Alexander frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone, and very few people knew the address of the mansion. "Don't answer it," Emily said instinctively, a bad feeling spreading through her stomach. But Alexander was already walking to the door. When he opened it, Emily saw a woman standing at the entrance, tall, blonde, with the same blue eyes as Amelia, but hardened by life and by something that seemed to be barely contained madness. She wore expensive clothes, but there was something desperate in the way she moved, as if she were running from something. "Hello?" "Alexander," said the woman, her voice loaded with a sick familiarity. "I missed you." "Isabella," Alexander instinctively backed away. "What are you doing here? How did you get the address?" Isabella laughed, the sound high-pitched and disturbing. "Did you really think you could hide from me forever? That you could just move on to the next little doll and I would disappear?" Her eyes fixed on Emily, and the intensity of the gaze made her tremble. "This must be the newest one. I must admit, Alexander, you have a very specific type." Emily felt the world spin. There was something in the way the woman looked at her, as if she were seeing a ghost. And there was something familiar in that face, something that stirred memories that Emily couldn't identify. "Get out of my house, Isabella," Alexander said, his voice dangerously low. "No, your house." Isabella laughed again. "Oh, darling, are you still keeping up the charade? Still pretending that you have any right to anything in this family?" She turned to Emily. her eyes shining with a malice that made her blood freeze. "He didn't tell you, did he? About who he really is? About what he did to get all this?" Emily looked between the two, feeling that she was about to discover something that would change everything again. "What is she talking about? Isabella, I'm warning you." "Warning me what?" Isabella shouted, all composure disappearing. "Are you going to kill me like you killed your own brother? Are you going to burn me alive like you did to him?" The silence that followed was deafening. Emily saw Alexander turn completely pale, saw his hands tremble, saw the entire mask of control shatter in real time. "Ah," said Isabella, smiling cruelly. "Now we get to the truth." She turned to Emily, and when she spoke, her voice was loaded with a venomous satisfaction. "Emily, dear, let me introduce myself properly. I am Isabella Parker Smith, and if our birth records are correct, I am your half-sister." Emily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "What?" "Our mother, Rose, had several daughters, darling, but she couldn't keep any of us." Isabella smiled, but there was no warmth in the smile. "The difference is that I discovered the truth about our dear Alexander much earlier than you did. I discovered that the man we're loving doesn't even exist." Emily felt as if the world had exploded around her into thousands of cutting fragments. Half-sister. The "otich" word echoed in her mind like an impossible mantra. She looked at Isabella, really looked, and now she could see the similarities she had missed before. The shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw, something in the way she moved that was strangely familiar. "You're lying," whispered Emily, although she already knew it wasn't true. "Am I?" Isabella tilted her head, studying Emily's face with a predatory intensity. "Rose Parker Smith, born in 1975 in Queens, worked as a domestic employee for several wealthy families. Had at least 3 daughters that we know of, me, you, and probably a few more scattered around that she abandoned." Her words were like precise stabs. "She had an interesting habit of getting pregnant by her employer's sons and then disappearing with a generous amount of money to keep quiet." Alexander tried to intervene. "Isabella, this has nothing to do with—" "Shut up," Isabella shouted, turning to him with a fury that made Emily instinctively back away. "You have no right to speak. You who don't even have the right to use the name you carry." Emily looked between the two, feeling that she was watching a play for which she didn't know the script. "What are you talking about? What name?" Isabella laughed, the sound echoing through the hall like shards of glass. "Oh, dear little sister, you really don't know, do you? You thought you were falling in love with Alexander Blackwood, heir to the pharmaceutical fortune, magnate of the medical sector." She approached Emily, her eyes shining with a sick malice. "But the real Alexander Blackwood died 15 years ago. Your lover there is just Andrew Blackwood, the younger brother who killed his own brother to steal his identity." The silence that followed was so dense that Emily could hear it buzzing in her ears. She turned slowly to Alexander, no Andrew, seeing the truth written in every line of his face. The guilt, the pain, the secret he had carried for so long was finally exposed, and he seemed to be disintegrating in real time. "Is it true?" Emily's question came out as a broken whisper. Andrew closed his eyes, as if the question was physically painful. When he opened them again, there was a dark acceptance in them, as if he knew there was no more escape. "Yes," he said simply. "It's true." Emily felt her legs weaken. Everything, absolutely everything, had been a lie. The man she had fallen in love with whom she had made love, to whom she had given her virginity and her heart, didn't even really exist. How? The word came out strangled. Andrew ran his hand over his face, suddenly looking much older than his 38 years. "Alexander was everything I would never be. Older, stronger, smarter. He was the perfect heir, and I was just the spare. My father made that very clear." His voice was loaded with an old pain. "On the night Amelia died, when we found out what had happened, Alexander confronted my father. They fought physically. It was the first time I saw my brother really fight for something." "And you killed him for that?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with horror. "It was an accident." Andrew exploded, but his voice didn't sound convincing even to himself. "They were fighting near the fireplace. My father was drunk. Alexander was out of control with anger. I just wanted them to stop. I pushed Alexander to get him away from my father, and he hit his head on the corner of the marble table." Isabella laughed cruelly. "What a touching version. Too bad it wasn't quite like that." Andrew turned to her, his eyes flaming. "Shut up, Isabella. You weren't there." "No, but our mother was," replied Isabella. "Remember our mother, Andrew? The housekeeper who witnessed everything? Who you paid to keep quiet before having her committed to a mental institution." Emily felt nausea rise in her throat. "What mother?" "Yes, our mother also worked for the Blackwoods, darling. Until she witnessed Andrew deliberately smashing his brother's easy head against the table and then setting fire to the house to hide the evidence." Isabella approached Emily, her voice low and venomous. "Andrew didn't just kill his brother. He burned the body so no one could identify it. He assumed Alexander's identity. And when our mother started having crises of conscience, he had her declared insane." "My mother," Emily whispered, the pieces finally fitting together in a devastating way. "Our mother didn't go crazy. She knew the truth. And that's the best part." Isabella clapped her hands like a perverse child. Rose tried to tell the authorities what she had seen, but who would believe a traumatized domestic employee against the word of the only surviving heir of the Blackwoods? Andrew was very clever. He made her appear crazy before anyone could take her seriously. Emily looked at Andrew, seeing him with completely new eyes. The man she had thought she knew, whom she had fallen in love with, was a murderer. Not just a murderer, but someone who had systematically destroyed any witness to his crime, including the mental sanity of her own mother. "Why?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. "Why didn't Rose tell us?" "Because Andrew blackmailed her," said Isabella. "Threatened to make all her daughters disappear if she ever told the truth. Our mother has spent the last 20 years in a mental institution, drugged to the eyes, to protect daughters she didn't even know properly." Andrew remained silent, not denying anything. Emily could see the guilt weighing on him like a physical burden, bending his shoulders, aging his face. But guilt didn't erase what he had done. It didn't bring Alexander back, didn't restore Rose's sanity, didn't undo years of lies and manipulation. "And Amelia?" Emily asked, although she already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. "Ah, that's the cherry on top," said Isabella, smiling cruelly. "Amelia didn't kill herself because her father was going to sell her. She killed herself because she discovered that Andrew had murdered Alexander. She witnessed everything too, but unlike our mother, she preferred to die rather than live, knowing that the brother she loved was a monster." Emily felt the world completely collapse. Everything Andrew had told about Amelia, about the guilt he carried, about the terrible father, it was all a lie, or at least all told from a completely distorted perspective. Amelia hadn't died to escape being sold. She had died because she couldn't live knowing that Andrew was a murderer. "You lied," said Emily, her voice growing in volume and intensity. "About everything. About who you are, about how your sister died, about our mother, about me." Tears of anger began to stream down her face. "You made me fall in love with a ghost." Andrew finally moved, trying to approach her, but Emily backed away as if he were radioactive. "Emily, please. I know how it looks, but what I feel for you is real. The man you knew, the man who loves you, he is real." "He doesn't exist," Emily shouted. "Alexander Blackwood doesn't exist. You killed him. You killed the man I thought I was loving." It was then that they heard sirens in the distance, rapidly approaching. Isabella smiled like a cat that had swallowed a canary. "Oh, I forgot to mention. I called the police before coming here. I said I had information about an old homicide that was never properly resolved. I brought some interesting evidence, too." She waved a folder that Emily hadn't noticed before. "Letters from our mother, medical documents, even some photos she managed to take before Andrew found out." Andrew turned completely pale. "Isabella, you don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm finally doing justice." Isabella looked at Emily, and for a moment her expression softened. "I'm sorry you got involved in this, sister, but you deserve to know the truth. We all deserve it." The sirens were getting closer now, and Emily could see blue and red lights reflecting in the windows of the mansion. In a few minutes it would all be over. Andrew would be arrested. She would find out if Isabella really was her sister, and the life she had built over the last few months would completely fall apart. But strangely, Emily felt relieved. Finally, all the lies were coming to the surface. Finally, she would know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. 3 years later, Emily was sitting at the piano in her small living room in Brooklyn, playing the same melody she had learned from Amelia, so many years ago. Chopin's waltz flowed from her fingers with a melancholy that had become part of her, a constant companion on quiet nights. The apartment was simple, but it was hers, bought with the money she earned as a freelance writer, far from any external influence. The doorbell rang, interrupting the music. Emily knew who it was before even opening the door. Every Tuesday, punctually at 8 in the evening, Isabella came for dinner. It was a ritual they had developed since meeting again in court, 2 years ago during Andrew's trial. "I brought wine," said Isabella, entering with a bottle of red and a smile that still carried traces of the madness that had consumed her for so long. Therapy was helping slowly to heal the wounds left by years of manipulation and blackmail. Hand news. Emily closed the piano lid and turned to her sister. It was still strange to think of her that way, but gradually they were learning to be family. "What kind of news?" "He's getting out next week," Isabella said directly, without beating around the bush. It was one of the things Emily had learned to value about her. After so many lies, Isabella's brutal honesty was almost refreshing. Emily felt her heart race, but kept her expression neutral. "Parole?" "Exemplary behavior. Participation in rehabilitation programs. Volunteer work with victims of domestic violence." Isabella opened the wine while speaking, her movements too casual for the weight of the conversation. "The lawyer said he genuinely changed. That prison broke him in a good way." Emily sat on the sofa, accepting the glass of wine that Isabella offered her. In the 3 years since Andrew's imprisonment, she had tried not to think about him. She had moved, changed jobs, tried to rebuild her life away from the shadows of the past. But there were nights, many nights, when she woke up with the taste of him still in her mouth, with the echo of his voice whispering her name. "And our mother?" asked Emily, changing the subject. "She's still recovering. The doctors said it takes time to reverse decades of unnecessary medication." Isabella sat beside her, and Emily could see the familiar pain in her eyes. "But she's lucid most days now." "She asks about you." Emily nodded. Visiting Rose at the rehabilitation clinic was always difficult. The woman she found there was a ghost of the mother she vaguely remembered, fragile, confused, carrying guilt she could no longer hide. But gradually, in family therapy sessions, they were trying to rebuild bridges that had never been properly built. "Emily," said Isabella, her voice becoming more serious, "he sent a letter for you." Emily felt her blood freeze in her veins. "How do you know?" "Because he sent one to me, too, asking for forgiveness, explaining things, and asking me to deliver yours." Isabella took a yellowed envelope from her purse but didn't immediately offer it. "You don't have to read it if you don't want to." Emily looked at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. The name Emily was written in the calligraphy she knew so well, but there was something different about it, less arrogant, more humble. "You read it," she finally said. "Out loud." Isabella hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I am." Isabella carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the several handwritten pages. When she began to read, her voice was strangely soft. "Emily, I don't know if I have the right to write to you, but I need to try. Not to ask for forgiveness. I know that some things are unforgivable, but to tell the complete truth. The only truth I never told you, that you saved me. Not from prison, not from guilt, but from myself. You showed me who I could be if I stopped running from what I had done." Emily felt tears burn her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Isabella continued, "I've spent 3 years learning to live with what I did. There isn't a day that passes without me thinking about Alexander, without me wondering how things could have been different. I learned that assuming his identity wasn't just about inheritance or money. It was about trying to escape the guilt of having caused the death of the 2 people I loved most in the world. Alexander and Amelia died because of me. I carried this for 15 years, trying to be someone else, trying to buy absolution, when I should have sought redemption. But you taught me that forgiveness can't be bought. It has to be earned." Emily closed her eyes, remembering the night they had made love, when Andrew had cried like a lost child in her arms. Even then, even through all the lies, there had been something real in that moment. Something she had never been able to completely erase. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Isabella continued reading. "I'm not asking you to wait for me. I'm just saying that the man you knew, the man who fell in love with you, he was real. He was who I could have been if I had had the courage to face the truth from the beginning. And that man loves you. Always has, and always will. Isabella paused, looking at Emily. There's more. Continue. If you give me a chance, not as Alexander Blackwood, the magnate, but as Andrew, the man you helped find his humanity again, I promise that I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the love you gave me. Not with lies, not with manipulation, not with money. Just by being honest, finally being honest. I love you. Emily, I love your strength, your compassion, your ability to see beyond the masks people wear. I love how you made me want to be better. If you let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving this. Andrew. The silence that followed was profound. Emily could hear her heart beating in her chest, could taste the salt of tears that finally began to fall. Isabella carefully folded the letter and placed it on the coffee table. He changed, Emily, she said softly. I hated him for so long that I wanted him to rot in prison. But when I saw him in court last week, for the parole hearing, he's not the same man anymore. The arrogance is gone. The manipulation is gone. There remains only a broken man trying to rebuild his life based on truth. Emily wiped the tears with the back of her hand. How can you be sure? Because he gave up everything. The money, the properties, the companies, everything to a reparation fund for the families of the women he manipulated over the years, including us. He'll have nothing when he gets out, Emily, less than nothing. And yet the only thing he asked the lawyer was to deliver this letter. Emily stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city lights that twinkled like terrestrial stars. For 3 years she had tried to hate Andrew. She had tried to erase the memories, bury the feelings, move on. But the truth was that a part of her had never stopped loving him. Not the Alexander Blackwood he pretended to be, but the vulnerable man who had shown his true soul that night in the mansion. Are you going to see him? Asked Isabella. Emily closed her eyes, making the decision she knew she would make from the moment she heard about his release. Yes, but not as the woman I was, as the woman I've become. A week later, Emily was waiting outside the state penitentiary when the gates opened. The man who came out was recognizable but transformed. Andrew was thinner, grayer at the temples with deeper lines around his eyes. But there was something different in the way he moved, less predatory, more humble, as if he had finally stopped carrying the weight of being someone else. When he saw Emily, he stopped completely. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the distance that separated them, not just physical but emotional, temporal. 3 years of pain, growth, and a brutal honesty that had cost everything to both of them. Emily, he finally said, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. You came. I did, she responded, walking toward him. But not for the person you pretended to be. I came for the man you chose to become. Andrew nodded, tears shining in his eyes. I don't have anything left to offer you. No money, no power, no security. Just the promise that I will never lie to you again. Emily stopped a meter away from him, studying his face, looking for any trace of the old arrogance. She found none. There was only a man who had paid the price for his crimes and was now trying to find a way to live with honesty. Then tell me the truth, she said. Tell me who Andrew is. Not who he was, not who he pretended to be. Who he is today. Andrew took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep waters. Today, Andrew is a man who spends each day trying to make peace with the past. Who works with therapists to understand why he did the things he did. Who writes letters to the families he hurt, even knowing he will never receive forgiveness. Who learned that real love means putting the other person's well-being before your own. Emily took a step toward him. And what does Andrew want now? Oh, Andrew wants the chance to love you the right way. Without lies, without manipulation, without power games. He wants to build a simple life where we can just be two people who love each other, without secrets, without shadows from the past. He extended his hand but didn't try to touch her. He wants to make you happy in a way he never could before. Emily looked at the extended hand for a long moment. She knew that accepting would mean forgiving the unforgivable, loving despite devastating mistakes, choosing to build a future on the ashes of a toxic past. But she also knew that the man in front of her had paid the price for his crimes, had transformed in a way that few could, and she knew she loved him, had always loved him. She put her hand in his, feeling the familiar wave of warmth that spread up her arm. Then let's start from scratch. My name is Emily Parker Smith. Nice to meet you." Andrew smiled for the first time in 3 years, and it was the most beautiful smile Emily had ever seen. "My name is Andrew Blackwood, and the pleasure is all mine." 2 years later, Emily was again at the piano, but this time she wasn't alone. Andrew sat beside her on the bench, his hands moving over the bass keys while she played the melody. They had learned to play together, not the melancholy waltz she associated with the past, but new compositions created by them. Speaking of second chances and love built on truth, Isabella and Rose dined with them every week. The family they had lost was slowly being rebuilt, not perfect but real. And on the small coffee table next to the piano keys rested a simple note. "This time I pay you with what really matters, honesty, devotion, and all the love I can give. Forever yours, eh?" Emily had never responded in writing.